about human-centered leadership, I'm going to introduce this concept from a study we have conducted with Stanford University. So because I study the future of work and looking over the trends, I, for one, become quite troubled around how we rethink the experience of work, but also leadership. And I wanted to better understand, if possible, what could the future of leadership look like? When we approached Stanford, there was something I said to them. I said, you know what? There's a lot of study around what's not working for organizations, and there are a lot of leadership books out there. So let's not do what we know is not working. I'm curious to understand what may be working for some of the organizations. Remember that data point I showed about 52% of Fortune 500 companies disappearing since the year 2000? So we did opposite of that. We went to the 48% that has been staying in the game year over year in the past several centuries. And we asked a few if they wanted to be surveyed. About 120 of them said yes, so we studied this particular research with them, with their help. And so our main question was exactly this: what are some of the critical factors that enable organizations to remain sustainable and enable them to go through growth year over year despite the changes that we are seeing in the environment? And we found a number of things, but two things jumped at us very quickly. And I care to make this a point with you. So in the organizations we looked at, first of all, what we have seen in comparison to their peers, they had 50% higher productivity, 40% less burnout, they had about 100% more energy, they had about 70% less stress, and overall more satisfaction. And we asked in the focus groups why this is happening. And the anecdotes that came back, we have been able to trend. It's because organizations, these organizations in particular, are able to offer more holistic experiences to their employees. So they care about the mental for sure, but they equally care about the spiritual, the emotional, and the physical. And when we have that sort of a holistic experience, as individuals, we thrive. When we thrive, of course, when we are in our authentic self, when we connect to our purpose, and when we can live that purpose within our own boundaries, we become more open to collaboration, and creativity starts to flow. And from there, results follow as well. So organizations thrive. So this was an eye-opening learning for us to begin with. But going back to our original question, here's what we found out. What makes an organization sustainable and enable their growth year over year are two factors. There's adaptability and there is resilience. Adaptability refers to an organization's ability to keep up and update and evolve their processes and procedures with the times changing. Resilience, however, refers to the capacity individuals have inside an organization and their ability to sort of bounce back from adversity. So then we asked ourselves naturally, okay, if these are the two factors, what enables these factors? And we found a number of common behaviors across these organizations, common mindsets, and common attributes, which we will go into next. So in terms of the leadership behaviors, here's what we found out. These organizations have 5 common leadership behaviors. The first one is, in these organizations, leaders sit in many chairs. What that means is that the way leadership is consumed in these organizations, they don't think of leaders as someone sitting in a hierarchy. They see everyone as leaders. And everyone in their role has some level of authority, and they feel they're empowered to decision making. The second one is, inside these organizations we found, leaders actually lead themselves first. These people are a lot more authentic. They know their purpose, and they're there to live their purpose. And from there, yes, they equally care about leading others, but they start with themselves first. Also, we found out inside these organizations, leaders lead for head, yes, but they equally care about the heart and hands. So they don't just come up and say, this is our strategy, here is the data, here are your goals, go make it happen. They take the time necessary to sit people, explain, narrate the story, and make sure people understand their part in that journey and how they can best contribute. We also found these leaders lead for connection. And I mean with that, connection among peers, but also to the outside world. So these leaders were thinking, how can I enable this person? How can I set them up for success? So when they were hiring, for example, within the first 90 days, they were giving their hires a list of names these people need to meet with. Go meet these people because they're going to be success to your journey. And then they would say, if you don't know something, here are some organizations you can benchmark with. Or let's say you're an HR professional and you're a first-time HR professional. Here are a number of colleagues you can reach out to inside the organization. So they were connecting and enabling people for success. And lastly, these leaders were leading with growth. They actually had growth in their mind, both at an individual level, but also at a team and organizational level. So they care to learn for themselves, they care to grow, but they also looked for opportunities where they can grow others within the team. And sure enough, they were setting some over-objectives, if you will, to grow the organization, time over time. So these are the behaviors, but I wanted to share with you how difficult it is to actually cause behavior shift. Because when you look at these behaviors, you can very well say, well, we can probably teach our leaders to do so. You probably can, but know that it's going to take a bit of time. And for us too. And here's why. A lot of our corporate training systems are designed in a way where it gives information to people. But in terms of behavior shift, in terms of change, information does about 10% to us. Why? This is what happens when we have information. We either have inattention to blindness, or we go into confirmation bias. Like, I hear you, but I'm not going to believe you, or I don't even want to hear you. So the information is good, but it often creates a lot of anxiety with people, and they don't necessarily know what they're going to get into, so they feel overwhelmed. Another thing we often do inside organizations is motivate people. Again, be it through training or day-to-day, we think if we just simply motivate them, they're going to be able to do the right behaviors. But motivation is about another 10% of our behavior change. Here's what happens with motivation. We understand, we reason, so there is a bit of empathic care happening, and we may even start the change, right? We may commit to something, but it's pretty temporary. It doesn't stay. Here's what really makes behavior shift. It's the way we see the world. That's about 80% of our behavior change, but that's probably the hardest to do. And I wanted to share with you why that's so hard to do. Here's how a behavior develops in human beings. It starts from your right side, from the physiology. So when something happens, for example, you're walking down the street, let's say 7 p.m. in the evening, you hear a noise. There's physiology involved in that where the raw data is coming in. So you hear it through your ears. If we don't have our physiology, we don't interact anyway. But it first comes through our physiology. And then it goes to the raw emotions. Something goes through your spine. And you think, I heard something. And if that noise is something that you are not familiar with, you're going to have a particular emotion. And if it's something you're familiar with, you're going to have a different emotion. So from that energy flows your emotion, right? You feel something, you're scared, or, oh, I know, I think a cat is coming, or something, right? Then, if you experience that a couple of times, that becomes a thought in your mind. This is what happens. I'm walking down the street, I hear something, I get scared. So I'm scared of walking alone into the evening, for example. That's the thought. And depending on that thought, you start behaving a particular way. That's how our behavior develops every time, for every behavior that we do. So when we are talking about behavior change, we have to go all the way back up to build it again, rebuild it, on a different spectrum this time. And that's why it takes time, and that's why it takes so much effort. So know that I, for one, am very against traditional corporate learning settings where we sit people and we tell them, here's the new information, now go do it at your own time. It doesn't work. No one knows, no one understands. Yes, you hear it, but you don't know how to do with it. A better way could be that we think about science and we actually take the time necessary for people to experience things. Because as adults, we learn through experience anyway. We actually get to practice it. And we give people some tools that they can put at use. And then slowly, by that practice, they will get to learn what they need to learn and cause the behavior shift. The kinds of mindsets that were supporting these behaviors, we found a number of different mindsets. I'm not going to go through all of them. But for example, inside these organizations, people cared to see more of the abundance versus scarcity. So if they had something, if they had a resource, they made a point to recognize that versus paying attention to what they didn't have. And for the purposes of our conversation today, we're going to focus on interconnectedness. So inside these organizations, people cared to have the interconnectedness necessary over having the self-orientation. Here's a visual for you. This is a nature-self comparison. And the question I would like to ask you is how you see yourself in relation to nature. And nature meaning the trees and the true nature out there. But in your work setting, you can also think about nature as your environment. We all see our relationship different to the nature, but what's key here is this has been studied, and people who see themselves closer to the nature actually are more agreeable, they're better collaborators, they remain more positive, and their health, their well-being is often a lot more elevated. If we see ourselves as separate, we feel a lot more alienated and isolated, and we have a lot more health issues. That's an interesting point of data. What's interconnectedness? Here's how we define it. Inter meaning between, connectedness being joined together, and ness state. So it is a web. It's about how I see myself in relationship to others. And if I see myself as a potential bridge to the environment and to others, then I feel like I'm more connected. That's the interconnectedness state. Here's another study I wanted to share with you. This is called the Sender's Chamber. I have the links if you want to look it up. In this study, they take a person and put them in a room, and they take someone that person cares about, let's say my husband, in another room. We don't see each other, we don't hear each other. And we are both connected to some wires, they are measuring us all the time. Every time I think about my husband, his well-being gets elevated. Well-being gets elevated. So his heart rate drops, he feels better, he's not sweating as much, he feels happier. You should read it up, it's really interesting. We think we are not able to affect others by the virtue of our being. It's untrue. We truly are interconnected. We truly are connected. There's a lot of power we have that we don't even recognize inside of us. And this is how we formulate our being. From tissue, from cells to tissue, to a person, our body, to two people, to a family, to the nation. You know, this is how it grows. And how we come about has an immense amount of impact in terms of how we relate. If we are not in our best state, if we are not in our most authentic self, we have a difficult time relating and connecting to others. This is also very complementary to how we find meaning inside of a system. A system is simply an integrated parts of units. And it starts with a single point with one individual, but then you have teams and bigger teams, and finally the organization. That's how we come about in a system. And if we understand that one point, and if we continue to understand as we grow, so if I know my purpose inside of my job, and then I become a part of a particular team and I understand the purpose of that team, and I know how that team is contributing to the broader purpose of the organization, then it all makes sense. That's how we make sense of our environment in the workplace. Some of our findings, when we lack connection, not only we feel worse, but from a health perspective, we actually have more inflammation in our body. And inflammation is really the cause of all diseases. It's like smoking. No offense to smokers out there, but that's what it does to our body. And we find when we study people, when they're isolated, they feel isolated, or they're far away and disconnected, disjointed from their teams and their team members or their organization, they have more tendencies towards drinking, towards depression, anxiety, sometimes even suicide. And on the opposite, when we are in connection, everything feels better. And again, it goes back to that core motivation of being a human being. We truly are here to connect. But that connection starts with self-connection. We need to not forget that. We really need to feel comfortable in our own body, in our own mental and emotional state first, to be able to then relate to others in an effective manner. The path to inclusion, so a couple tips. Integration is key. Again, integration starts with self. So we are all unique, but we all have strengths, and we have things that we don't necessarily so much like about ourselves, and that's okay. We have development areas. But to be able to find peace with that, and to say, you know what, I don't function well under particular circumstances, but I'm gonna try my best, that's integration already. You don't have to accept self as one. And it doesn't happen like that anyway. But if you can say, you know what, for me, for example, I really, really need my weekends away from work. If I'm asked to work over the weekend, I hate it. I get all stressed. I get all cranky, right? I know that. Sometimes I have to do it. When I have to do it, I do my best. But I make sure people know that I don't like it. So let's get what we need to get done on Friday, and then I don't have to think about it until Monday. That's already a step forward. Paying attention to language, this is key. I can't tell you how many leaders we work with where they don't even realize the kind of language they're using. They may be saying never or always, often, all the time. And then when we put it in front of them, they go, and we'll ask them to make simple changes, like take the word of never out and look for a possibility of something else. And it makes a huge difference, not only in terms of how they realize themselves in their lives, but how people perceive them too. Words have amazing power. They become our reality. Providing direct rather than abstract experiences. So instead of saying, here's a virtual learning, go take it, which is great, I'm all for on demand, but that's not the same as sitting with someone and explaining to them what they need to do differently. That's a growth opportunity for both parties involved. Interactive versus passive information. Similarly, showing people the way. You can very well say, there's information about this in the handbook, go read it. But it's a different thing if they're actually learning on the job. Providing a community, allowing for emotions. There's a lot to do, and I love the concept of brave leadership because of this. There's a lot to do. We have to learn how to be comfortable with discomfort. When somebody is sad in the workplace because their mother is sick. We don't know how to handle that. We don't know how to sit with that. Or someone comes in and they're super tired because their kid was cranky throughout the night, they couldn't sleep. We don't know how to handle that. And you know, sometimes it's as simple as just being there for the person to say, I'm really sorry you had a terrible night. Is there anything I can do to support you throughout today? And then hope that they get a better sleep the next day. Okay, we have an exercise, and we're going to try to make it quick to make up for time. This is a 3-part exercise. In the first part, in your worksheets, you're going to find a number of statements. And I'd like you to find at least 2 that you'd like to work with and consider the impacts of those specific behaviors on you, on another person, your team, and the broader organization. Let's just take 2 minutes to do that. Okay, so in part 2, we're going to think about what does connectedness mean for me. And if I were to take into account the behavior and the impacts that I have just listed, how can I better cultivate my attitude? So how can I evolve my thinking so that I can behave differently? And then how do I better communicate it? Now, what can I say if I can change some of my words? Or how can I feel differently about this that's going to impact my behavior? We looked at the different behaviors, right? Leadership behaviors, there were 5. We looked at a number of mindsets, and we focused on interconnectedness. Here's the last question we ask ourselves. Are there specific attributes that support the mindset shift? And turns out there were. There were 8. Starting with purpose, courage, foresight, emotional insight, wonder, wisdom, compassion, and mastery. I want you to recognize these are attributes that are available to all of us from birth. Doesn't matter where you are born, doesn't matter your education, doesn't matter your job status. These are attributes, that's why we call them core. They're core human attributes that are available to all of us. And what's interesting about these attributes we found, depending on where we choose to play, we can either be on the shadow side or we can be on the bright side, but we have an impact in the organization. So I'm going to give you an example. We found where inside the organizations we studied, if leaders could lean into their courage and in the right way, it was actually contributing to psychological safety across the organization. Where they didn't, they were sort of scared and pulled back and didn't speak or live their truth, it was actually contributing to creation of insecurity inside the organization. So we can have a choice in terms of where we play with each one of these attributes. So what happens with compassion is this. If we are able to act with compassion, we are able to bring about more fairness inside the organization. And we'll talk about how that happens. But essentially, when we are self-compassionate or where we understand others and are able to connect to them from an empathic place, we actually treat people more equally. So there's more equity in the system. And if we don't, indifference happens. Indifference happens in a way where people say, no matter what I do, no one cares anyway, so I'm not going to care either. Now, these attributes, we actually share these in a 4-day program. So this is a very high-level touch, and I sincerely apologize for that. But let's at least discuss what compassion is and how you may be able to live it differently inside the organizations you're in. So this is just an inspiration. I love this saying, and I love the illustration Martha did for us and friends, because we are all kind of in our own little worlds. We may or may not show, but everyone carries a burden in their heart. If I were to have coffee with each one of you, I'm sure we would all be mesmerized with each other's stories. That's just the truth. We don't know, and so everyone deserves the kind of kindness. But from a definition perspective, this is how we think about compassion. It's sensitivity to pain, but beyond the motivation, there's an active pursuit of helping eliminate the pain from the situation or from someone's heart. And so we think of compassion as being nice to one another or just thinking kind things about each other. It's not. It's more of an elaborative process. There's pain for sure, and someone needs to express that pain, but there's the recognition of the pain, so something is not really happening the way it should be, and then feeling for the other person, but more importantly, doing something about it. So if you're a leader, if we are all leaders, you see a conflict inside your organization, two people getting at it. You have a choice to say, I know they are going at it, but I'm not going to do anything about it, right? Or you may say, that's too bad. That's not being compassionate. If you see people are in conflict, it's very likely that they're in pain. And not only they're in pain, it's likely that this connection is creating pain for those around them. So you can choose to say, I'm going to go listen and try to understand what's happening here and see if we can build a bridge. That's compassion. So that's how we think about it. There's an action that's involved. In terms of pain, I want you to know not all stress is bad. We are designed to sort of protect ourselves from a fight or flight perspective. There's some goodness to stress, but there's some badness to stress too. And good stress can give you really good things. And bad stress can actually create a lot of anxiety, isolation, and disfragmentation. So when we are in good stress, we feel like, okay, we're in our flow, we can be productive. There has to be the right amount. But when we are overstressed, then we go into a whole different situation where we feel like I'm not in control, I have anxiety all the time, I feel overwhelmed, and there's despair. And it has an impact. The bad stress has an impact on our performance, on our decision making, on our cognitive ability, on our ability to build trust. It affects productivity as well as loyalty. So when we see something, it's important that we try to help eliminate and alleviate the pain. There's, of course, a balance. I'm going to underline this. One thing I'll share with you, a lot of the leaders will tell me, for example, in a performance situation, oh, I don't want to necessarily tell the other person that they're not doing something right because I care for them. That's bullshit, excuse my language. Okay? Every time you're not being honest with someone, you're potentially taking an opportunity of learning from them. Would you want to be in that situation? No. So being compassionate actually requires a level of courage. And that's why attributes are actually built on each other. If we had more time, I would tell you about it. But anyway, compassion is one of the later attributes that come because you need the purpose, you need the courage, you need some of the other things to build on top of it. But there needs to be an action and there needs to be a genuineness to our action. When we are able to have that sort of compassionate presence, we discuss issues, we are able to discuss scenarios, options. There's just more understanding. You know, there's more active listening. We say for all the things on your left, cognitive reassurance, that's for me is hope. If you're able to discuss issues in different scenarios and build options together, you're essentially giving someone hope. And we all need hope. And on the other side, if you're listening actively, if you're looking to understand and build solutions together, we call it emotional reassurance from scientific perspective, but you're actually validating the other person. You're saying to them, I see you. I see that you're in pain. I'm here for you. And we're going to get through this together. This is from another study, not our study, but in cultures of care and compassionate love, a lot of good things happen. You know, teamwork goes up, job satisfaction goes up, client satisfaction even goes up. So you not only keep it inside the organization, but it goes across. And a lot of things go down. A lot of things we often see, like turnover, absenteeism, safety issues, etc. And I want to leave you with the thought that you are the leader. You're the leader of your life. You're the leader of your life experience. You're the leader of your work experience too. And we are the change from an individual perspective. Talking about a culture shift, we tend to think culture shift starts always from the top, but it's not so. It can start with one individual, and it can be anywhere inside of an organization. So we did the attributes in a DNA format because we wanted it to represent one person from a DNA perspective. And that one person is inside an organization. Many people come together. We create the organization itself, but if we can shift our mindsets, that eventually ends up in a behavior shift, that's when culture starts to evolve. And from there, we have the kind of organizations we want to reside in. You have some printouts. Take it with you in terms of pathway to resilience and growth. Remember that it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. And if you're unsure where to begin, in your printouts, there's a particular tool we work leaders with. It has some questions you can ask yourself around, how am I being in the workplace? How am I relating, and how am I doing? And remember, we all want belonging in life, and work is no different. As human beings, we all have a need to be seen, to be heard of, to be cared for and recognized for our unique contribution. And with that, I will say thank you. And I think I'm out of time, no? Okay. Thank you very much for your time and attention.